Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to this edition of the Big East Rewind. I am your host, Chuck Everson from Villanova University, and my co-host, my partner in crime, my buddy, Sonny Spera. How are you, Sonny?
Chuck, doing great. Just for you, I brought in the big guy. Just for you.
That's awesome.
Just
listen,
okay.
Now you're starting to see the light, Sonny.
I know. It took me
together.
A while.
The big stick together.
Good
we
friend.
had I thought you did me a favor on bringing in your roommate, but I didn't realize it was your roommate. I thought we had another big guy, Syracuse big guy. It turns out you live with them, so I lost out on that one. I thought you were going down for that one. But today we have with us another Syracuse legend, Sonny. Syracuse legend from 1977 to 1981, had an 18-year NBA career, and comes from a famous basketball family, which we'll get into a little bit later on. But Danny Shays is with us today. Danny, how are you? Thanks for coming on.
Chuck, I'm doing great. Having with you and Sonny, getting to spend some time hanging out. Nothing's better than that. So looking forward to a good chat.
Yeah, we've been doing this. I don't know if you followed us, but we've been doing this for a while, and we're trying to hit all the different angles from the Big East Conference from back when you were there at the start of it all,
sure,
till modern day stuff. And we've had a lot of fun. We've gotten different perspectives from officials, from mascots. We had the Dome Ranger on, right, Sonny?
Yeah,
he was giving us his perspective.
St. John's Redmond
players, so it's been an interesting ride for Sonny and I. It's an interesting journey for us, so we've been enjoying it. So,
well, we'll get to the first big controversy of the Big East. That'll come up during the conversation. So
go ahead, start it off.
Definitely get to that.
Go right into it. Go ahead.
Well, the first year of the Big East tournament, right? My senior year, the league was official. We had double round robin play, but the league did not yet qualify for an automatic bid in the NCAA. That was the second year. So the first year we had just graduated Louis and Bowie, the two stars of that earlier generation. So we had a rebuilding year, started off slow, but then really picked it up at the end of the year. We ended up finishing the regular season 15-11, but we're really on a roll. Get into the Big East tournament at home in the Carrier Dome, and ended up winning a couple of games, play Villanova in the championship game.
Yep.
And went down as one of the great.
Who was in the championship game?
Yeah. Pretty sure it was Villanova.
All right, good. Okay, good.
Triple overtime. I remember.
Triple overtime. One of the great classic games in Big East history. We ended up winning it. I was fortunate to be player of the game. It was great. Both teams played great. Went down to the buzzer. Ended up winning it on a Leo Routen's tip-in, and then of course the famous Raleigh Massimino one too many timeouts. We were up 2. I ended up shooting the technical free throw to put us up 3, and of course that was before the 3-point line, so that iced the game. And going into selection weekend now, 18-11 with momentum, winning the Big East tournament championship. And we got bumped. We did not make the NCAA tournament that year as an at-large. And that was like the big scandal. How did Syracuse get left out, finishing so strong, winning the tournament? You're trying to get the Big East established. And we ended up going to the NIT. Back then it meant more because there were more teams in the NIT, as the NCAA tournament being smaller. We ended up making all the way to the final game. I ended up blowing out my ankle in the first game of the Final Four. We played Tulsa. Paul Pressey, NBA star on that Tulsa team, ended up taking him to overtime and losing at the buzzer for the NIT championship. But it was a great run, and ended up with a 20-plus win season, even though we started out slow. But that Big East championship was both one of the classic games in Big East history and also the most controversial the way it turned out with the NCAA tournament.
Yeah, it's interesting how that worked out. I mean, being an infant conference basically at the time. I mean, I guess that's why they didn't have that at that point. But would you say, Dan, that was probably one of the better teams that you were on in your 4 years at the Cuse?
Well, the year before we were ranked in the top. I think we made it as high as number 2 with Roosevelt Bowie being the senior star there, All-American center. Louis Orr, as you know, was an NBA player, ended up now coaching at Georgetown. So we had a very strong team. But our senior year, like I said, Leo Routens had come in, Eric Sandifer, Tony Bruin, the 3 sophomores that year. We ended up having, like I said, a great finish. And really had a nice year. It was a really positive year. Quick side story from the game. After the game, we went over to, because it was an early game, afternoon game. So by the time it ended, it was, dinner time. And so to celebrate the game, we went over to one of the steakhouses in town called Scotch and Sirloin.
Oh,
And we were going to go, Dad was taking us out, for a nice steak dinner. Well, we got there and it turned out that the game was so exciting, none of the people would leave the bar to go to their tables. So for the 3 overtimes, the restaurant was empty. And by the time we get there, now they got 3 hours of people lined up because nobody went to their tables. Bar is just neck deep in folks. We walk in, first time I should say, got a standing ovation going into a restaurant. Because everybody had just got done watching the game. So needless to say, we did get a table right away. But it was kind of like the cherry on top of the entire evening.
I hope that standing ovation meant they stood up from their tables and said, "Here you guys go."
Exactly. So like I said, somehow we miraculously got the next table, didn't have to wait for everyone to clear out, and nobody complained. So that was
there you go.
That was good.
It's always a plus.
So Dan, I want to take you back a little bit now. So growing up with a famous father, Hall of Famer, Dolph Shays, top 50 NBA of all time. What was it like in the house? Like, where were you at? Was his career done? Give me some references, time frames for you.
So he retired in '64. So I was 4 or 5 years old when he retired as a player. So I don't really remember him as a player. I'm the baby of the family, youngest of 4. So I had an older brother I have an older brother, 2.5 years older, 3 grades. So for me growing up, that was like my play guy because I was always the big kid, right? So to have a brother 3 years older, his friends were all the right size. So,
Right.
got to play with his friends. And my dad, the real first major professional sports influence, he ended up getting the job as coach of the Buffalo Braves,
Oh, wow.
1970. So I was a 6th grader.
Yeah, McAdoo?
That was right before that. They had Ernie D. Ernie D. Gregorio. Yeah, they were their expansion year in Buffalo. They're now the LA Clippers. They moved out there in the 70s. And then moved to San Diego first and up to LA. But he was the head coach, so I got to be a ball boy for the team. Go to all the practices, all the games, work the road locker room. So you had Pistol Pete in his prime. You had the then Lou Alcindor coming in as a rookie, his first year. And to be, kind of in the locker room, especially the road locker room. So I got to meet all the visiting players coming through. Was just such a thrill going to the games and, just being around that, going to the practices for the home games. He would take me on one road trip a year. So we went to Detroit in the old Cobo Arena with, Bob Lanier and the
Sure.
Detroit Pistons.
Mm-hmm.
And so that was amazing. 70, 71, then 73, he gets inducted into the Hall of Fame. So, went for that. So that was really kind of one of the earlier events as far as the NBA. But he actually, interesting side note, he started the second basketball camp in America. He and Bob Cousy in the 50s started basketball camps back to back and kind of created the industry. So I grew up going to basketball camp every year and learned most of my fundamentals in that week-long camp. It was I really felt like I improved a year in that week. I had great coaching. The camps of today are actually way watered down compared to camps then. My dad's camp, every team coach was a high school varsity or more. College assistants used to make half their money by going around to the camp circuit in the summers, and he always bring in a varsity or like a NCAA star coach or an NBA player or coach every year. You have Raleigh Massimino would become a regular. JoJo White for the Celtics would come up. Right. Dave Bing, of course. Jumpin' Johnny Green, power forward back in the day. So, yeah. And so every year I just got that great exposure to the game. But really it started even earlier than that. I was actually named for the inventor of the 24-second clock, Danny Bizone, who was the owner of my dad's team. So, growing up, Danny owned the Eastwood Sports Center, which is a bowling alley and a rec center. We used to go over there and have lunch and hang out with Danny and talk about the old days. We'd go into his office. He'd have all the old Nats memorabilia from the All-Star game and all the other stuff. And just be immersed in it on that level. I was still young enough to remember when, Johnny Kerr was a neighbor up the street. Some of the old guys who stayed in town, Paul Seymour, I knew most of his life. Some of the old Nats players, Hal Greer, Larry Costello, of course, close family friend. So that original Nats team was still a very big part of my growing up, even though the team had moved to Philly years earlier and, all those guys were now retired.
The official Chuck, just so you know, when you visit Syracuse on Armory Square, the original 24-second shot clock, it's there. It's outside.
Oh,
just
really?
So you know. Yep.
There you go.
So talk about so you're playing and you did camps. How about your basketball in high school now? You'd played right on up, I would assume. So at what point did you sort of become Danny? Like,
Well, I was always the tallest kid by far. I was 6'8" as a freshman, 6'10" as a sophomore. So basketball was the thing. Although I was actually a really good lacrosse player, everyone knew that I wasn't going anywhere playing lacrosse. So it was, I wasn't really taken seriously at it. They wouldn't let me near the football field because skinny knees were just too big a target. And nobody wanted to take the chance. So those were kind of the sports you played at JD at the time. But I played varsity as a sophomore, and we had really good teams. Ended up going undefeated my senior year. We had this great rivalry with Liverpool. Pete Holohan was the star there. If you remember, Pete, all-state football player, great quarterback. Actually went to Notre Dame as a quarterback. Played the NFL as a tight end for years. Converted to tight end at Notre Dame because they had this guy Joe Montana, who's a pretty good quarterback. And so he had a great career. So we were fierce, bitter rivals. We played him twice. First time we beat him by one at their place. And then, again, local lore, the rematch was snowed out, the one at our place. And so they didn't play the game. Season ended. We're 13-0. They're 12-1 in the conference. So they had to reschedule the game. And but there was no place to put it. So they had to wait till all the playoffs were completed and then play the grudge match for the league championship. And we had a tiny little gym, sat 400 people at the time. They've since built a new one. So they wanted to move the game to Manley Fieldhouse. They felt they could sell out 10,000 at Manley for this rematch grudge game. And we refused because we wanted the home court advantage. So we had to have a lottery for the tickets. And as a result, the PBS station televised the game live. It was the first televised high school game in New York State.
In your 400-seat gym?
In our 400-seat gym, yeah, the grudge match, Syracuse-Liverpool. Game went into overtime. We ended up winning it, at the end. And it was one of the. You look back in your career, and it's one of the 5 great games in my career. The Big East Championship was another one. So it's amazing. Little Syracuse came up with some pretty influential games.
So how did you make your way to Syracuse University? How did that go? The recruiting process and stuff at that time.
Well, it was kind of like a lifetime recruitment. I actually was going to games back when Manley had the dirt floor and the elevated court and the bleachers. For those of you who with a big memory of SU history, and because as you know, Manley was originally built as a football practice gym, and they ended up playing games in it. The original setup, it had a dirt floor, and people would walk around, and dust would be in the air. And so I went, games back in the early 70s, knew most of the guys, the guys from that era, Jimmy and Mike Lee, Rudy Hackett, Ernie Siebert, those guys were all.
Those are guys I met at camp. Yeah.
Met at camp, played pickup games with. Roy Danforth, of course, was close to the family. Jimmy was assistant coach then, but Jimmy used to be a counselor at my dad's camp when he was in college. We got pictures of him back when he was 19, 20, a counselor at my dad's camp. So that goes way back. Bernie Fine was a high school coach when I was in high school, and so we played against each other. Then when he got the SU job, just kind of kept in touch. So that was, but it still was kind of a long shot, actually. My, was down to Princeton, Wake Forest, and Cuse for the last 3. Princeton had that great coach Pete Carrill, who my dad was very close with, and Wake Forest at the time, Carl Tacey and Dave Odom. And I went down to my visit at Princeton. I liked a lot. It wasn't my style. I was like a jeans and t-shirt, as unpreppy as they come back then. My first job was pumping gas at Tony Shell, right? I wasn't exactly a prep school kid. So Princeton wasn't a good fit, but Wake Forest I really liked, almost signed there. And really came down to a coin flip between Syracuse and Wake, and ended up picking Syracuse at the end.
That close.
Wow. That's pretty tough.
Was there any influence from your brothers or any other family members that said, it'd be nice if you're here, we could see you play more, anything like that?
Yeah, not really. Actually, the funny part is, Chuck, my brother went to Villanova. He went there as a freshman, stayed a year, didn't finish, but so he was actually down there a little bit. Sisters were were away. The older one went up to St. Lawrence, and my middle sister went to Ithaca. So they were out of there, yeah, still in the area, but kind of by the time again the baby coming through college, they were all adults and out of the house and scattered all over. So, yeah, it was actually my dad was very close and thought Princeton would be a good fit from the basketball side. When I was looking at Wake, Mike Jaminski was at Duke, and that was the old Tobacco Road ACC.
Yep.
And like I said, I was real close to signing there. So it ended up being kind of felt I had something to prove at Syracuse. A lot of people didn't think I was good enough to play there. Rick Pitino was the assistant that year, my freshman year, if you remember that short window. And it turned out I had the longest career of anybody ever at Syracuse. So it worked out pretty good. And here 50 years later, Jim Boeheim's still around. I was there year number 2. He's doing 46 now, and Carmelo's breaking my record. He's year 19, I think, for him. So
right, that's right.
Great for him.
Right. Now, when you decided on Syracuse, Dan, did you give any thought to the fact that your dad cast this enormous shadow? Being the player that he was, Hall of Fame, and all of that, and obviously there was going to be comparisons because you're his boy, and did that play into that? And what was that like for you every time? Because it had to be tough. I mean, because every time you do something, your dad did this, and there's got to be comparisons and stuff. Talk about that for a second. That had to be.
Well, that was omnipresent. As a matter of fact, the first time I ever got my name in the paper, back then, getting your name and picture in the paper was a big deal, right?
Yeah.
First time I ever got my name in the paper, it was Danny Shays, son of NBA Hall of Famer Dolph Shays, who scored this many points, this many years, did his one championship, played well. So it was Danny Shays, my dad's bio, and played well at the end. That was the entire mention in the paper. So that was a start, and sure, he was always around. As a matter of fact, the TV game I talked about that local PBS televised, my dad was the big interview at the beginning of the game, and so he was around, and even all the way through the Big East. Remember, he also coached in Philly. The Sixers moved to Philly, right. So whenever we'd go down and play in the Palestra, he was around there. Actually, we actually had this big incident we'll get to later that, he was kind of in the center of, but, and there was always something, I remember playing in New York, and, at the Post the next day is like, yeah, well, he looks like his father and plays like his mother, like you get those kind of, when they try and put the crack in the, in the column.
Yeah, the backhand compliment.
Exactly. So, it was always around, but hey, the guys, now, has made every major team, the silver anniversary 25 team, the top 50, now the top 75. We're going to be celebrating in Cleveland here in a couple of weeks. So a pretty good tie-in.
Yeah, I would say so. But it just had. I'm sure it just got. Did it get on your nerves at all that every single time that you did something, either good or bad, you always had that there? Or
I wouldn't say it got on my nerves, but it was there all the time. Probably the saving grace was by then Syracuse was not an NBA city, right? So the university was a very different track. He went to NYU in New York, although some people mistakenly thought he went to SU. But so he went to NYU. So that part of it was relatively independent. Obviously, being in the league, I played mostly out west. Yeah. And in his era, there was no west, right? So if I played in New York or Philly, would have been a much bigger deal, but Utah, Denver, Milwaukee was not big. They really had no NBA presence.
Yeah,
back in his era. So for that part, I was relatively unscathed.
So I got to ask you when you start. I got to ask you when you started at Syracuse, because you said Rosie is there, and Rosie had established a big guy at Syracuse that I think that and I think he came in when Coach B started coaching. So
right. He was year 1, I was year 2.
Right. So he's the center, and you're coming in as a center, as a freshman right behind him. How just talk a little bit about those first couple of years. Were you trying to find your way? And like you said, a lot of people didn't think you could play there. So now they're saying, oh, look, see, you're not playing there. Talk a little bit about that, because I know that had to be more challenging because you're living under a microscope.
Well, I still had a pretty good role. Originally, we talked about running a Twin Towers offense. If you remember at the time, Kentucky really started it, like the first Twin Towers when they had Rick Roby and Mike Phillips there in the late 70s, or national championship teams. And it was like kind of being the rage. Rosie and I had very different styles of play, very complementary styles of play. And so there's a lot of thinking that, and Coach and I did a lot of talking about using that as a real significant part of our team. And we did it more kind of sophomore year, junior year, when we had Lewis. So it was me, Rosie, and Lewis on the back line, of the 2-3, or even our kind of swarming man-to-man defense that we ran was real effective. He didn't really catch it on as like a regular part of the lineup, but it was something we did real effectively, a lot of times. So, I thought about redshirting, getting the extra year, but like I said, my role was always good, and by the time I was a senior, I led the team in virtually every category. And, like I said, we had that great run at the end. Rosie ended up having a very strong career overseas, never did play the NBA, interestingly enough, and played, I think, 17 years overseas, had a great career there.
Right.
And we're still good friends to this day. I see him around Syracuse all the time. And, the other thing that kind of came up to it is here I for 3 years, I played against maybe the best center in America, scrimmaging in practice every day and banging up against them. So at the end of the day, like I said, it would have been a different path if I had gone down to Wake Forest and started early, but ended up with a great outcome.
So your senior year, like you said, you guys didn't. You used the word rebuilding, which I was surprised to hear. So that's your senior year, and you have Leo's a transfer. You have Red and Eric as the two freshmen, and sophomores. I'm sorry, as sophomores.
Yeah, at that point they were sophomores, right?
Excuse me. So the freshmen were Jeannie, Sean, and Larry, right?
Right.
So now here's your senior year, and you did. I do remember you coming on. You particularly come on gangbusters, and then when did you say, hey, the NBA is a reality for me? Because you went in the first round. So when did it become, oh my gosh, that's for real?
Well, it's interesting. So when you talk about rebuilding, I use that only in the sense that we lost Louis and Bowie from that year before, when they were, the two dominant figures, both on the team and really as national figures, right? So
in the picture, right?
Yeah, exactly. So, we had a lot of guys coming back, but from a style standpoint, the team was completely different. So going through the year, probably the biggest game I had early in the season, we played up at Detroit. I had 30 plus and a big win there, TV game. And it actually kind of started a little competition between me and Eric Sanifer. Eric was a Detroit guy, wanted to have the big game, and I kind of stole the thunder that day.
No, Eric, no.
Exactly. So, so we kind of went, kind of back and forth. That's one of the reasons it took us a little while to gel, I think. But so at the end of the year, remember, scouting was a way different deal back then. It's not like every game was on television. We weren't a highly ranked team, so we weren't getting all the pro scouts there. But there was a big senior tournament called the Aloha Classic.
I was going to say the Aloha Classic
that took place every year in Hawaii, and ironically, Jim Boeheim coached the Eastern team. So I got invited. Jimmy got me invited out there as the center. And the Classic itself was loaded, but our team was considered by far the weakest. I mean, some of the guys there, Kelly Chapuka from Notre Dame, Darnell Valentine from Kansas, you had Tom Chambers, Danny Vrains. You had a lot of really strong players from the other three areas. And for us, it was Franklin Edwards from Cleveland State, ended up being a pro player, Harvey Knuckles from, I think he was from Cincinnati. Wayne McCoy was on that team from St. John's, so we had, I think Sleepy Floyd was on that, in that group.
Yes.
And I'm trying to remember if Mike McGee was there also. I think Michigan, Mike McGee was on that team. But we ended up winning the thing in kind of a fluke. I mean, the top teams knocked themselves off at the end. We ended up winning the championship game, and I was on the all-tournament team. And all of a sudden, I went from a guy considered a second-ish round pick to I'm the second center picked in the draft. Really, from that weekend, that exposure, because I really dominated the position. And the only other center who went ahead of me was Steve Johnson, Oregon State. If you remember, Steve played for Kansas City at the time, the KC Kings, and great scorer inside, low post, but undersized, 6'9" center. And that weekend really vaulted me from being a good center to being the elite in the country, because again, I got to play against the top centers and outplayed them pretty handily.
But your game could translate to today, Danny, because you were a face the basket player. you had that 15, 20-foot range. Were you shooting threes at that point or not?
Well,
really?
not really. It was kind of unheard of for bigs to shoot threes.
But now you would be. I mean,
but now I'd be shooting them all day long. Yeah. And the other thing, Sonny, that's interesting is the way my game is designed is that from an analytics standpoint, I show up really well. From a pure stat standpoint, it's a little bit different because I do a lot of things. Like now they analyze things like plus minus and combinations, things you do on the floor. As a matter of fact, when I was with Denver, the guy who kind of started that craze was the Nuggets GM, Pete Babcock, and it was rudimentary in the compared to what they do today as far as the video analysis where their computers are tracking every step you take. But Pete tracked a lot of things not necessarily tracked in the box scores, and he broke them down on a per minute basis so he could compare. And it turned out when I was a free agent one year, he called me in and showed me his stat book, and I was at the center position. I was second in the league, only behind Akeem Olajuwon from an analytics standpoint. Now I didn't get the minute; I was only playing low 30s a game in minutes, where most of the bigger centers were playing high 30s, 40s. So stat wise, I wasn't near the top. Remember, you had, at the time this position was loaded. Team was in Patrick Ewing, Rick Smits, Ralph Sampson. You still had some of the older guys, Parrish and Joe Barry Carroll, and on and on. I mean, there were a lot of high scoring centers. Kareem, I think, was just retiring at that point. Moses was in the game. And outside of Kareem, I was from their analytics, per minute, I was the second most effective center at the position. So I would have fared much better today in that kind of environment. Although the game has changed so much that you're right, a guy like me who's both a playmaker and can face up would have a spot today where the low post guys are kind of dinosaurs.
Joker, you'd be the Joker.
Yeah. Exactly.
Yeah, Djokovic. Yeah, exactly. Face up. Yep. So you mentioned it earlier. I want to go back to you started to tell a story about the Palestra with your dad. I'm a little familiar because it was against us.
Playing in the Palestra.
Sonny's favorite building. The cathedral, Sonny's favorite building. It's funny, Dan, because when we played each other twice a year, obviously you know how that goes. Occasionally at the Garden, but I'm not going to even count those games. And we went 500 against Sonny and his guys every year. We always got killed at the Dome, and we always killed them at the Palestra. So
yeah,
the Palestra was a tough place to play.
So go ahead, Chuck. Sorry.
So we're playing the John Pannone team. Right. Down in the Palestra. It's a back and forth game. The place is rocking,
Now this is the year, this is the year that you guys played us for the triple overtime. So this was the beginning of that,
Exactly. So middle of the season, we're playing down there. I'm having a big game, and I won't say we're not running away with it, but we have the game in hand near the end. There's a minute to go. We're up 3, with possession, got fouls in our favor. We're looking really good to win the game. I got 4 fouls, but I'm, all good. Ball swings, I front Pannone, put the hand up, get the great pass over the top. All the stuff you learn at basketball camp, right? Sealed them, went it for 2 hands, so it had the easy put up for the, to kind of put the game out of reach, get called for the offensive foul, I'm out of the game. And worst call in history. And I've bitched at refs for a lot, so I know bad calls. Worst call in history, changes the entire tenor of the game. Game's on TV, and they show Dolph up there grinding his teeth, and this and that. Well, the game ends, and he wants to go chew on the ref, right? So he comes down the stands, ready to yell at somebody, and they've been watching him the entire game. Now they have security literally attack him. They sent a bunch of security guys over to grab him, drag him out of the stadium, and it turned into a thing. Well, my dad was the coach of the player and coach for the Sixers, right? So all the Philadelphia media is there. So paper the next day, was the bifold, I was at the Inquirer. I forget which one was the New York Post size. The whole back page, the cover of the page, Shays pops off. Picture of my dad. Big thing, like he went down there to commit capital murder against the now it's a national story. And my sister, who's at the time living in Davenport, Iowa, calls up and says, I read in the paper Dad beat up the ref. What? I mean, it's a national story now, just because the thing got blown up so fast and hard by the Philly media. And the kind of the funniest part of it was even the local Syracuse paper got the little political cartoon guy, and he does the drawing of, well, the Crunch aren't doing much and this team's not doing much, but good thing Dolph still has some life in him. And they show him, getting all pissed off. So anyway, it turns into this big thing. And so yeah, that was my last visit to the Palestra.
Wow. Yeah, I'd heard about that. It was kind of a legendary story. So I heard about that, but I wasn't sure. First time I heard the whole thing. So
here's how the story ends. So you might remember Sonny Bob Martin, who was the reporter for Syracuse. So the game ends, and I'm just bummed. I'm just sitting on the bench. Guys are everything's swirling around, and I don't really see this part with my dad because it kind of came and went pretty quick. But I'm just sitting on the bench, and how it is that when the game ends, you're like, cussing everybody, just sitting there. So in the locker room, he interviews me and he says, well, why didn't you just leave the game leave the bench right away and go to the locker room? I said, and I tried to make light of it. So I was joking. I said, well, I had no place to go. It's not like I had a date or something, So next day he writes the article, and then he goes, when asked why I didn't leave the bench, Bob Martin says, I had no place to go. Like, that's how it sounded. And I'm like, okay, those were the words in the right order, but I'm making a joke and he makes it sound like I'm a lost puppy with no place to go, and it ended up being like such a downer. And I actually called him on it, and he reread the story and he goes, oh my God, you're right. It does sound like that, and since he heard me say it, it didn't sound like that to him writing the story.
Right.
But he never he joked or giggled or, tried to, whatever. So anyway, so the whole thing turned into a complete cluster. And, so, luckily the Big East Championship game kind of, took all the sting out of that.
Yeah, that turned it around for you.
But that was a great rivalry, that, John Pannone, strong player, was first team All Big East, if I remember.
Yep.
And
he was a guy that got everything out of what God gave him, Dan. I mean, he was big on up and unders and banging people and getting three and, the old fashioned way,
Played through contact.
Exactly.
Oh, yeah.
Exactly.
I got the crap beat out of me more than once in practice by him. That's for sure.
There you go. So
I got to share with you the first time I actually met Dan in person was that there's two stories I got to share. One was I was at camp as a student, and Danny was there, and Bernie was talking about flexibility. You got to work on your flexibility. He said, "Come here over here." Did he call you Big? Did he have a nickname for you, Bernie?
Bigfoot.
Bigfoot. All right, so he calls me. Come here. I thought it was. Come here, Bigfoot.
Yeah.
So Danny comes walking over, and I'm like, "Oh, this guy's pretty freaking big." And then he goes, "You got to work on your flexibility." Danny takes dance classes in college, and I was like, "What?" He goes, "Watch." And Danny sits on the ground, and he goes to touch his toes, and he goes. His head is at his knees. His hands are like way beyond his toes. And I stand up and I can't get past my knees with my hands. My knees. I'm like, holy, I'm not even close. Was that part, like, did that help you with your longevity? Like this, because you had this flexibility. I mean, there was no such thing as yoga, but holy cow.
I always had good flexibility, and I was known to be the guy who stretched all the time. My Denver teammate Mike Evans, he used to joke whenever he played pickup game, hold on, Shay's got to stretch for 10 minutes before we start. Like I was always real diligent like that. But I got to tell you the dance class story. So that's actually a true story. So one day Bernie comes to us with this brilliant idea to make us all more agile. So he has me, Chris Jarebko, and Marty Head take beginning jazz.
So you had the jazz hands going.
Had the jazz class, and he says you got it. First of all, it'll be great for you. And it's 4 guys, 100 girls, and I'm like,
not bad
odds,
good numbers,
right there. Good numbers. Right, so I go to take the class, and then I find out that the good-looking girls take the advanced jazz. Beginning jazz is for everyone trying to lose 30, 40 pounds. So it was we used to joke that they were known as the Thundering Herd. Now, please no gimme gender thing. I'm insulting. I'm not any of that. It was just, funny story back in the day. And so Marty did not take the class very seriously, as you can imagine. He just kind of sat there. If he could text on his phone, he would have been texting the whole day. Yeah, I was a little early, but he just stare at the ceiling, could care less. Me, I said, hey, it's an A. So I've got to be here. I might as well get something out of it. Ended up ace in the final, which was a routine. Little Doobie Brothers, believe it or not.
there was video of that we
Dancing
could
with
put in,
the
Stars.
seeing
He
your
was Dancing
final.
with the Stars before
Dancing with
out.
the Stars before it all came out. Wow!
I'll show you. I'll show you.
With the outfit, did you get it? Did you get a dance outfit? Some sequin
it was just
shorts or something?
sweatpants and and a t-shirt. But I'll show you the transcript. I got an A for beginning dance and took it with pleasure.
Yeah, so he was trying to convince you. So the second story, we were playing pickup and archball. That was the old basketball facility, before Manly. And we were walking across campus towards the bus to head to Manly. And I'm talking with Danny. And Danny goes to me, first of all, Danny enjoyed playing with me because I gave him the ball. Okay. Danny's like, nobody ever feeds me the ball. Thanks for getting me the ball. So we were walking and he says, so what are you going to be? And I was like, I'm going to be a dentist. He goes, okay, what are you going to major in? And I said, I don't know, probably biology. He goes, major in chemistry. I was like, why? He goes, listen, you got to go to dental school. You got to take general chem and organic chem. You're halfway to a chemistry major. And I was like, okay, done. So I owe a lot to Danny Shays.
There you go.
There you go.
True story.
So I grew up with from a long line of math geeks. Okay. Dad went to NYU as an engineer, graduated high school at 16. So Sonny, you're going to love this story because you're a smart guy. And he goes to DeWitt Clinton, which is an elite school.
Are you trying to say that I'm not going to like the story?
I was enjoying that.
Yeah, you
Sonny's
heard that, right,
Sonny? Like it.
I was letting that go,
yeah,
Chuck.
Sonny's going to enjoy it.
Sonny's going to like the story. Chuck, if I hear snoring, I'll
like
understand.
it or not.
Chuck, go get some Play-Doh.
So Dad goes to NYU or goes to DeWitt Clinton, an elite high school. They used to share the school with Bronx Science, right? If you know your New York history. So middle of his sophomore year, he's 16. He graduates and leaves the team as the city champion to go to NYU and register as a 16-year-old. Signs up as aeronautical engineering. He used to joke. He says, "Well, the airplane was just invented. I figured there wasn't that much to learn." Graduates NYU in 3 years. But imagine he ends up leaving his team in January and playing at NYU like the next week. And he's still to this day the youngest player to start a Final Four game at 16. Wow. He starts a Final Four game. So long line of math. My sister's a math tutor. Her husband was a math teacher. All her kids are PhD economists. Long line of math geeks. So I go to SU as a math major to start. Well, and because I grew up in the area, they offered SU courses in my high school. So I took freshman calculus, got that out of the way, took freshman English, and I took a music course. I was a band kid. So I went to school with a semester of credits already. So now my freshman year, I'm taking sophomore calculus. And it's calculus in 3 dimensions. I don't even know what the hell we're going to do with it. Like, what do you even use it for? So I'm like, this is too theoretical. It's only my freshman year. Where do you go from here? So I switched to biology, liked it. And then like you, had to take chem, right? So I ended up acing freshman chem, took organic. And the professor there inspired the crap out of me. He was a Japanese national, young guy, and I turned him into a huge basketball fan. And we just hit it off. I became like his assistant guy and helped him out and studied all the time. I owned organic chemistry. I was the guy who broke the curve. Everybody hated. And my greatest academic triumph is they had a test for the entire year, a final, 8 in the morning on my birthday, of all things. And I'm so far ahead of the curve, I only need like 100 out of 250 to get an A. And he had this thing where he would weight all the questions so you knew how much each one was worth. So I go through and I count 150 points. I write them all. The ones I can do as fast as I can answer the question. Finish the final in 25 minutes. Went and turned it in. And I walked by. And so the backstory of that is one day he calls me into his office and says, "Hey, I want you to know you." And we got to be best friends. Big basketball fan. Came to some games and learned basketball. Calls me into his office and says, "I want you to know you've just been paid the highest compliment you can be paid by your fellow students." I'm like, "Really? What might that be?" He goes, "They turned you in for cheating." And he goes, "Before you get mad, just know they turned you in because they can't figure out why you're getting better grades than them. And they figured you must be cheating." But he knew that I was doing the work. So when I turned this final in 20 minutes, a 3-hour final. I walk out doing the victory dance. I'm giving the pageant wave. I'm like, looking, "Hey, yeah, you'll do great." And I'm literally flipping them off as I go by. Jerk offs. So anyway, punchline is the guy won the Nobel Prize in 2010. He's been a great mentor, and just on because I ended up really enjoying organic chemistry, chemistry of living things, I ended up, studying under a Nobel Prize winner. I mean, it was, one of the great influences of my life. So there you go, Sonny. See, I told you, chemistry's the way to go.
And just so you know, Howard Trish was a chemistry major, and I think that was partly because of me, because he came to my class with me, and he wasn't going to dental school, but I did sort of give him the Danny Shays. I was like, you can take general chemistry and organic chemistry. You're already there.
Exactly.
See, you touched a bunch of guys there, Dan. Sonny played it forward. He paid it forward. So
that's right.
Got Howard to go too.
And it was a great major, right, son?
I enjoyed it. Yeah, I did.
And I'll tell you what, it's got a lot of cachet when you tell people you're an organic chemistry major. First of all, nobody knows what the hell it is.
That's the first
thing. They do the thing, and so
you do get some interesting looks.
Yeah, right.
That's for sure.
Yeah.
So Dan, talk about some of the teams when you were playing at Syracuse that gave you a tough time, and some of the good matchups that you had. You mentioned John Pannone. What were some of the other ones that you remember playing against that were real good matchups?
Well, at the time, I think the teams that were kind of the best matchups for us, there were actually a lot of good centers in the league. You remember UConn had Corny Thompson at the 4 and Chuck Alexinas at the 5.
Alexinas,
They were, big physically. I mean, Chuck was a monster, very mechanical, but physically, just he had 50 pounds on him. He was a moose, so he was always a tough matchup. St. John's had Wayne McCoy, Walter Berry at the forward, right? They were loaded. Wayne McCoy in 8th grade had a section in the I think it was the Times Sunday. The next Lou Alcindor, he was the big up and coming thing. Was he never got big enough to be a pro, but was a kind of a 6'8", 6'9" forward, real good. Rutgers was a tough team for us. James Bailey, if you remember, he was a year ahead of me, but real good center. And probably actually one of the most memorable games, we ended up playing Purdue on national TV. This was the year before when Joe Barry Carroll was about to be the number 1 pick. Roosevelt was a senior, and that was like the big matchup. We played them at Purdue on that, and back then national TV was a big deal. It was like the game of the week. It's not like now every game's on. And that was like the hype national TV game. And, I ended up with a couple of big plays at the end to help seal the win. And, it was just one of those things that, just stick out in your head. So, in the Big East, as you know, was even though it was even just starting out, was still, Seton Hall was strong. The others. I mean, it was a tough conference. Even a team like Pitt had. You remember Sam Clancy? Remember that name?
Yep.
Sam Clancy, 6'7", power forward, center, physical beast, jumped to the moon. Really, not a great player, but just that enforcer guy. Ended up playing 12 years in the NFL as a lineman. Never played football at Pitt. But was so athletic, he ended up converting to the and made the NFL and had a great NFL career.
Hands.
Exactly. So there was some, it was quickly, it was amazing how quickly the Big East really gelled as far as sucking all the Eastern talent. And that was really the point behind it. There was no league in the Northeast, so all the players went ACC, Big Ten. And when the Big East hit, all the players could now stay home, compete in the Garden. And, of course, the Dome wasn't there yet, but Manley Fieldhouse was still a great home court. Then obviously Georgetown was kind of just starting to become Georgetown. This was pre-Patrick Ewing. But Sleepy Floyd was on that team.
Sleepy Floyd.
Was
Ed Spriggs? Ed
Spriggs was on that team.
Spriggs,
yeah. And actually, my first NBA point guard was John Duran, Georgetown guy. So when I was with the Jazz, so I went from Georgetown hater to liking John Duran. We got to be great buddies. And so just starting the Hoya paranoia and of course the game that made the Big East was the Manley Fieldhouse is now officially closed, or whatever that Georgetown that final game was, and that ignited the grudge match of the century.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
it sure did.
So
and that runs deep.
So Dan, when you got selected, right? So you're a first round pick NBA by was it Utah?
Utah Jazz.
Utah. And then I remember when you signed your first $1 million contract, right? What was that? Was that year 4? It was like a 4 or 5 year $1 million.
It was a five-year deal, and it sounds way better than it was. So the first 4 years were 200 a year, and then the last year went to 350. So what does that add up to? 150 for 5 years.
Yeah, 1.15. Yeah,
that's taxable. So 200 a year after taxes. That, and tax rates were pretty high back then. I'm pulling down 10 grand a month. Which, hey, good money. I'm not knocking it, but Utah was among the worst paying teams. It was below the league, below the rookie average. But the ironic part was the Jazz at that time were always on a budget. They had trouble making payroll. You used to run to the bank, cash your check to make sure it went through. And I ended up getting traded to Denver my second year. And the quote in the paper, Frank Layden was the GM at the time, and his quote in the paper was, they had to trade me before my contract got so high I was untradeable, because it would skyrocketed in year 5 from 200 to 350. The average at the time was 275, 280, so it was barely above average. But that shows you that the team was always fighting financial trouble. They thought they were going to go under a bunch of times, and then they got Stockton and Malone, and the rest is history, right? But Larry Miller came in, really saved the team, and that's just been a great story ever since. And then I was in Denver, and they were our chief rival, really, for that next group of years.
Did you feel any pressure as a Jewish athlete?
Well, it's ironic, because going to from New York Jewish guy to Salt Lake City in 1981. That's that's when they used to print T-shirts. Welcome to Utah. Don't forget to set your watch back 20 years. It was a way different thing. So my agent at the time, Bob Wolf, a Jewish guy, ended up calling the head of the B'nai B'rith in Utah, and to try and get me welcomed. Meet the local families. Get a tour of the local synagogue, whatever, to get kind of connected. And Bob used to joke with me, he said, "Have you ever had a 7-footer in your organization?" The guy said, "You kidding? We never had a 6-footer." So that's the Jewish community was small in many ways there in Salt Lake. And back then the season actually started earlier. We started in September for training camp back then, and Yom Kippur happened in the middle of training camp. So I ended up missing an exhibition game. And the papers didn't know how to report it, because nobody knew what Yom Kippur was. And so it was, and the fans were like, were kind of booing me the next day, like I took the day off, because they didn't quite understand the connection. So yeah, it was quite the adjustment back in the day. I never had anything negative about it. I mean,
did you ever feel pressure because were you the first $1 million professional Jewish athlete?
Could be.
I thought you were.
I'm trying to think who might have came before.
I remember
me,
fraternity was celebrating it anyway.
There you go. Appreciate it. When I was in the league, Joel Kramer was the other Jewish player who was with Phoenix. He and I actually played together in the Maccabea games earlier. Joel was with Phoenix Suns, and then there was about a 10-year stretch in the middle where I was actually the only Jewish player in the league. And one of the magazines did an article, "The Last of the Mohebrews." Like that was it. Like I was the guy.
Oh my God.
And then when I retired, I think might have been a couple-year gap, and then Jordan Farmar came in the league. Then a couple of Israeli player finally made the league. So then we were back. But it was interesting. I'd go on the road, and especially the big eastern cities. I'd have a whole little group over there. Some of the Orthodox kids would be waving their yarmulkes at me, and it was a lot of fun.
That's cool. That's really cool.
That is, yeah. Interesting. So you played for what, 7 different teams in the league? Dan?
7 teams, yeah. So Utah for a year and a half. Then I got traded mid-year to Denver. Actually, a funny story. We were playing Denver on a Saturday night in Denver. And so I'm in the hotel downtown, walking in, and I see our GM, Frank Layden, and their GM, Carl Scheer, having lunch. And I was joking with them. I said, "Hey guys, how's business?" And they both chuckled at me. Turns out they were trading me at that time. So I ended up having a great
trade you over
game.
a cup of pasta.
Exactly. Over a club sandwich. Yeah, what's the joke? Yeah, they traded me for a club sandwich and a cup of coffee. So I ended up having a big game. Fly back, the next morning, and that afternoon I get the call from Frank Layden. "Hey, do you mind if I come over?" Geez, Sunday night, 9:00 at night. This can't be good. So he comes over to let me know I've been traded to the Nuggets. And so the next morning, 7 a.m., jump on a plane back to Denver, had a quick practice, and physical little press conference, get on a plane, fly to San Diego to play the next night against the then Clippers. And I, by then I hadn't slept in 2 days. I was so riled up the night before. I wake up, half asleep on this plane. I'm looking around, and I got to see Kiki Vandeweghe and Dan Issel, and I'm like, who are these guys, and where is this plane going? I mean, I was completely fogged out. Then you go, oh my God, I was traded. And so then it started. We played the Clippers, went home, played a game at home. I had a big night, and the fans couldn't have been better. So it was for me, it was an awesome change.
Yeah. Did you have any thoughts of like coaching? Because you talked Dan Issel, Kiki Vandeweghe, those guys were big time, after careers. Was that anything you were going to do?
I did. It was interesting because I played a long time, right? 18 years. And so most of the coaches who I knew, and as you know, that's a very connected business, right? You got to have somebody who likes you, brings you in to start, develop yourself and get known. Most of those guys I was really close with were done, right? Doug Moe had retired. Chuck Daly had retired. So it was actually hard to break in. I did the things, went to the summer leagues and to the showcases, and so it never connected that way. I ended up working with Pete Newell with the big man's camp and doing a few other
Pete
things.
Newell?
But so helped out with that after that. But and then when my son was growing up, I would coach his teams a lot, teach him how to play the right way, old school way. But that's never ended up connecting. When Hopkins was here, I used to, kind of call on the sly and give him tips on stuff I saw, just some simple tips on the center play, just kind of, to help out. Or when I was in town, I'd bang around with some of the guys. But never ended up doing it for a living.
Okay.
Wow. So what are you doing these days? A lot of people call, they check in with us, they send emails and stuff and ask us questions to say, you never ask your guests what they're doing now. So what are you doing now, Danny?
Well, right now I have an executive position with Rico USA, which is a big multinational. I do client strategy and I run their entire insurance portfolio. So essentially, I help a big insurance company convert their processes to digital, especially with COVID. Everybody is home. Access to data is a huge thing. So I'm a digital workflow guy.
So when you say Rico, as an Italian, the first thing I think of is the Rico law, right? So,
exactly.
all of a sudden, I'm looking for, Giuliani. Is he over my shoulder?
Well, this is the Japanese Rico, RICOH. They were the copier company. Now they're doing basically all the digital solutions. But but the shirts are still red. So, it's we got a little bit of the Ferrari red in there for you.
Yeah. Well, that's great. I'm glad to hear you're a successful guy and you continued that, all the way through your playing career and after playing, because that's a big deal with kids today. They don't realize that, once the ball stops, you still gotta work and survive out there, right? I mean,
well, Chuck, here's the funny part about that. In my era, guys made, like eggs, starter money, right? Nest egg money. We didn't make, can't screw it up money. And so guys who are good savers, they might retire with, a couple $100,000, $1 million in the bank, but that's not, live the rest of your life on it money, right? That's start a business, that's give you time to figure it out. So you really have to, and the biggest reason that athletes fail, I actually wrote a book on this, is not that they blow their money on the stuff that makes the papers, right? It's that they end up with a lifestyle they can't convert their assets into income.
Right.
And the price you pay is when you get, and I learned this, kind of the hard way because I played till I was 40. When I retired, I was a good saver, had a lot of money in the bank, but no income. And, interest rates weren't high enough to, to live on, right? Even if you had $1 million in the bank, right? Even at 5-6%, what was that, 50, 60 grand a year. And so, but you realize you're not really qualified to do anything. I was a good student, right? Graduated college, had a degree that was now, pretty stale and wasn't going to get a job in chemistry. I used to joke, I think I went to Guido Sarducci University, right? That's when he teaches, remember the old Saturday Night Live character?
Sure.
When he teaches you in 15 minutes, everything you remember 15 years after you get out of college.
Yep.
And so that's where I was, and I had to figure out what to do. That's why so many guys go into entrepreneurship. I can't enter the workforce because I'm now competing with kids fresh out of college who are, working 60, 70 hours a week for peanuts, getting started, and it's just don't really have the I'm just out of sync with all that. And athletes kind of give up that, those prime those work years where you learn how to get to be a top executive. And so I started with entrepreneurship. I read this book, Rich Dad, Poor Dad, which is Robert Kiyosaki at the time had just come out with talking about financial literacy and entrepreneurship. And I started out flipping little houses, going to seminars, learning what to do. And I ended up eventually, kind of grew that business, learned more and more, and just kind of worked my way up the ladder. I finally ended up getting a master's degree in entrepreneurship, and ended up scoring. At that point, I kind of had enough resume to look at some higher level corporate jobs. I worked for a economics firm doing sports economics projects. That was really cool. Then I ended up running the Retired Players Association as the executive director, to kind of help them through a transition. And now ended up, here I was a partner in a startup doing digital workflows, and that's how I ended up what I'm doing now. So, yep. So it's not easy. The reason a lot of athletes struggle is because they get out of sync with, like I said, that normal workflow, and it's hard to figure out how to get back into it sometimes.
Yeah. Well, we're running up against it a little bit, Dan. So let's get one more good story from you, and we'll wrap it up. Your choice, guest choice. You could pick whatever Syracuse story, a Frank Layden story, because he was quite the character, as we all know. Mm-hmm. Those of us that are that age, could tell you that he was a character.
Well, so it's funny. So if you look at some of the real kind of impactful games in your life, right? The ones you remember. So let's go over just kind of a couple of those, because I've been on both ends of them. Right. And even throughout history, we talked about the Big East championship game we won. But what's it like to be on the kind of the other end of some of those games, and what's it like 20 years later, 30 years later? So when I was with Denver, I played in the highest scoring game in NBA history, 184 to 186 Pistons against the Nuggets. And unfortunately, we were the 184. So imagine you score 184 points and lose in a game, right? Triple overtime. It was an incredible back and forth game. Nobody had a lead, even 8 or 10 points throughout that entire run up. We had 5 guys over 40 points in the game. It was a triple overtime. It was 135 all at the end of regulation, and then 51-49 over 3 overtimes in 15 minutes, right? Game did not slow down in overtime. An amazing game, right? You may remember the classic NBA game where, you hear the Johnny Most in your head, Dan Havlicek steals the ball, Havlicek steals it, right? The old Celtics win. Yeah, well, my dad was the coach of Philadelphia on the other end of that game. And so, that was always, kind of a game in the background that was always there. But maybe my favorite game of all time on the NBA side, regular season. When I ended up, my last team was the Orlando Magic. And, my claim to fame is I replaced Shaq in Orlando. So when he bolted for LA, they ended up having a messy divorce. And one of the funny side notes is that they had just literally filled up, that it was early in September, right? The season was just about to start, and the team shop was full of Shaq gear, jerseys, T-shirts, everything. So the joke was every homeless guy in Orlando had a Shaq jersey after that, because they had to do something with them, right? So they gave them to all the homeless shelters. So that year they brought in Felton Spencer and myself to kind of be that spot. I was the aging guy, I was the oldest guy in the league then. And then they ended up trading Felton for Ronnie Cycli. Ronnie and I were teammates. Ronnie. Yeah. Right. So Ronnie and I were teammates with Orlando at that point. Little trivia question. Ronnie and I have the same birthday, different years, but same birthday. So you can use that one for one of your trivia questions coming up. All right. And so the first year Shaq comes back as a member of the Lakers, he ended up breaking his thumb, couldn't play in the game. So year 2 is his first time back to Orlando. And Ronnie's the starting center. I'm the backup center. 2 days before the game, they trade Ronnie to New Jersey. I'm now the starting center playing against Shaq in the revenge game, coming back to Orlando. And I'm the oldest player in the league. Shaq's Shaq at his prime, ripping down backboards. I'm 39. And national, as you can imagine, big national TV game. Playing, Isaiah Thomas doing the game, right? And the whole thing they're talking about is lamb to slaughter. That's how they're describing the game. Shaq is going to score 100, tear the building down, gets booed every minute, playing against me of all people. So game starts and I'm doing my veteran stuff, playing physical, getting spots, drawing a couple of charges. I end up getting them in foul trouble, neutralize them, Start of the second half, I score the first 10 points of the second half, and Isaiah Thomas is talking about, wow, that Chuck Daly, what a genius, save Shays for the second half. Then he takes over the game. And I mean, it just went on and on and on. It was fantastic. We end up winning the game at the buzzer. Nick Anderson hits a 3-pointer, and you think we just won the NBA championship. Fans running on the floor, standing ovation. Just what an incredible finish to the game. And Sonny, you'll appreciate this. Not you, Chuck. You won't appreciate this. Being a fundamentals guy. So it was a weak side screen down. Nick Anderson coming off my screen down, catch and turns and drills a 3 over Eddie Jones. And after Nick comes up to me, it was just smooth and continuous, no hesitation, no looking where the defender was. And he came up to me after, he said, "Because you were setting the pick, I knew I was open." And if you end up pulling up the highlight, I mean, I'm digging in there. Eddie Jones is not getting around this screen, right? So Nick comes off, nails the 3, place goes bananas. And to this day, still one of the great Orlando Magic wins. So there is when you look at the great games in history, some you win, some you lose. But I'll tell you what, even years later, the ones you lose are still pretty cool.
Yeah, I tell you what, it's very interesting to talk to you because, and we've never really had a conversation before. I mean, I really, really enjoyed the conversation today. It was very smooth, very easy to talk to. Thank you so much for coming on and joining us today.
Absolutely.
Hour flew by, Dan.
Really appreciate it. The time just went right through, right, Sonny?
It did, man. It flew by. When I told him it's an hour, he was like, "Oh boy, you guys can talk."
We can talk, yeah.
And I almost let you.
That's right. Well, Dan, thanks again for coming on. We really appreciate you coming out. Today's guest has been Danny Shays from Syracuse, the Syracuse legend, 18-year NBA pro. Again, really appreciate you coming out. Thank you very much.
Happy to. Really enjoyed it.
Thanks, Dan. Oh, you
bet, Sonny.
You've been listening to the Big East Rewind with Chuck Everson and Sonny Spera. Big East Rewind was produced and directed by Nick Chicocoris and Daryl Gurney. You can check us out on YouTube. You put in Big East Rewind in the search bar, and we ask you to please like, subscribe, and share it with your friends. Thanks a lot for joining us. Have a great night.